Entonces, ¿qué es lo que no hay? ¿Sonido?
¿Quién era la que va a hablar?
Alexis. Ay, pobre chico.
Hi. Hi.
Hi. Hi, we're very sorry for the interruption. Um, we had a problem with the internet connection. The connection went down for quite a bit, so we're very, very sorry. And Alexi, Alexi, sorry, I just sent you an email to let you know. Did you receive it? I
Yeah,
sent
I
you.
thought I
Oh,
thought I replied to you.
okay, okay. No, because I don't have internet
Oh,
either.
okay, okay. No, no,
I
I received it. Yeah,
my
yeah, and
phone. But
I
I was
put.
worried that you are you still able to have your presentation
Yeah, yeah,
or
yeah, yeah. No problem, no
yes?
problem. We can go.
Okay.
I'm ready. I just need to share my screen, perhaps, for
Okay.
the PowerPoint. Um. So, oh,
I think you can do it now.
yeah, great. And so,
Okay. Thank you very
uh,
much. So we will just proceed because I don't want to take more of your time. Okay. Thank you, Alexia. We hear you.
thank you very much. Can you see the slides well?
Yes.
And okay, not the presenter's mode. That's I mean, yeah, you see the normal slides, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Okay, so I start. Well, hi everyone. I am more than happy to give a talk in the framework of this very great conference, and I would like to sincerely thank all the organizers for their amazing work in preparing this hybrid event. The purpose of my presentation today will be to investigate the concrete means in order to achieve what Husserl calls renewal in the Cairo papers. My claim is twofold. On the one hand, I assert that Husserl's presentation of renewal in these articles remains abstract, as it does not detail the specific method in order to accomplish it. On the other hand, I suggest drawing on other Husserlian material that such a method is best understood in terms of what he calls Stellungnahme, or position taking, interpreted as a critical procedure. So here is my outline. My presentation will be divided into three parts. The first part will demonstrate that even though the Kaiser papers do not explain how renewal is supposed to be concretely conducted, it is possible to fill this gap by introducing the notion of position taking, or Stellungnahme. In the second part, I will present Stellungnahme in the theoretical sphere and will depict its two main features, namely its teleological character and its agency. And finally, in the third part, I will emphasize that position taking in this sense can also be applied to the affective domain, which accounts for the possibility of axiological renewal. So let's start with a review of what the Kaiser papers offer and do not offer regarding the very nature of renewal. As I see it, these articles present three features of renewal. The first, most straightforward characteristic of such a transformation pertains to its end. Renewal clearly aims at a rationalization of all aspects of human life, both at an individual level and a collective level. As the third article states, from this arises a desire and will for a rational self-regulation, namely the desire and will to reshape one's entire life with regard to all of one's personal activities in the sense of reason. In addition, Husserl details the way of such a rationalization. Namely, renewal is to be an active task. it will not simply occur to us by virtue of a fate that we would observe passively. Rather, we have to strive for it. And I quote here the third paper again. Only through her own freedom, Freiheit, can a human being come to reason and shape herself and her environment rationally. Last but not least, Husserl also emphasizes the positive outputs of the operation of renewal. Not only would such a transformation on the social level avert disasters like that of World War I, it would also, on the individual level, bring about a form of profound happiness. And as the third article again puts it, a rational life leads to pure and lasting satisfaction. Because, why? Precisely because it avoids, as far as it is possible, deceptions and disillusions, especially in the axiological sphere. And in fact, the desire to protect oneself from such disappointments is actually the genuine motivation for the rational critique, which is at the core of renewal. As Husserl asserts again in the third article, such a critique is indeed intended to guard action in advance, im Voraus, from subsequent devaluations, Entwertungen. In brief, one could say that the Kaiser papers describe the purpose of renewal, namely individual and collective rationalization, the way of renewal, activity of freedom, and the benefits of renewal, lasting and robust happiness. However, these articles remain quite silent about the concrete means that are supposed to be implemented to achieve such a transformation. Importantly, in the first article, Husserl himself recognizes that for renewal to be genuinely carried out, it is necessary to bring the method of realizing it to complete determination and clarity. In this regard, the Kaiser papers remain largely abstract or programmatic. This specific method is never examined in detail. My idea is that, in fact, presenting this method would have required Husserl to enter into the details of his phenomenology of reason, which in turn would have compromised the accessible aspect of the Kaiser papers. As a result, I contend that the very task of renewal is genuinely understandable only in light of other parts of Husserl's works. My aim now will be to substantiate this hypothesis by identifying the missing piece, so to speak, of these articles with Husserl's theory of Stellungnahme, or position taking. I claim that position taking is the exact method to be employed in order to rationalize all domains of our intentional acts. So, to begin with, since Stellungnahme is an ambiguous Husserlian concept, as is well known, as I stress that in what follows, I will be only interested in the highest and richest meaning of this word, namely, Stellungnahme as a critical reflection undertaken by the subject to assess the validity of an intentional act. And importantly, this meaning, this highest meaning, can be observed within the Kaiser papers themselves. Husserl writes, for example, in the fifth article, freedom is an expression for the ability and above all for the acquired habitus of critical position taking, kritische Stellungnahme, on that which initially without reflection is consciously given as true, as valuable, as practically ought to be. But what exactly is a position taking in this sense? Well, the next two parts will answer this question. I will first emphasize that position taking as it pertains to the theoretical domain as precisely the structure involved in renewal. It achieves the highest form of rationality, it is active, and it protects the subject from future disillusionment. Then in the last part, I will show that position taking can also be applied to the affective domain, which sheds new light in turn on the pivotal axiological dimension of renewal. So, briefly put, position taking has two main characteristics. On the one hand, it is a teleological process oriented towards evidence. On the other hand, it crucially involves a form of egoic agency. So first, Stellungnahme is to be understood as a critical process, which thus necessarily takes place over time. Basically, each Stellungnahme is defined by a starting point, which is the emergence of a doubt regarding a certain proposition P, and an end point, the resolution of the said doubt. As a 1912 manuscript asserts, position takings do not encompass all positional acts, but only, I quote, the critical acts, the decisions, Entscheidungen, that call into question, that cast doubt, and then answer, resolve the doubt. The famous example of the mannequin helps illustrate this process. Here, the doubt consists in a conflict between a proposition P, this is a man, and a counter proposition Q, this is a mannequin, with which the former is incompatible. In this context, the position taking takes the form of a teleological striving. It strives to resolve the doubt, that is, to attain a non-modelized certainty. Yet, removing the doubt does not suffice to present position taking as a critical procedure. Indeed, it is always possible to resolve a doubt with a more or less arbitrary decision. The counter proposition Q still has some force, but I extinguish it to embrace proposition P with certainty. In paragraph 77 of Experience and Judgment, Husserl defines such a certainty as impure. And importantly, as he writes in a 1922 manuscript, these impure decisions are not Stellungnahmen in the strict sense. This sheds new light on the teleological nature of position taking. What is sought is not just any decision, but a rational one, a rational decision that precisely leads to a pure certainty. Now, the second crucial feature of Stellungnahme pertains to the agency it entails. As Husserl underscores in Studien 1, when we use the term position taking, it expresses a phenomenological moment of activity. But what form of activity? Well, at the lowest level, any foreground experience can be said to be active. But Stellungnahme as a critical procedure refers to a much more demanding kind of activity, which involves a genuine freedom on the part of the ego, as Husserl stresses, for instance, in Ideas 2. The difference between these two levels of activity is illustrated by the following example that I find very interesting. Husserl says, I read the newspaper and adopt, aufnehme, the statements, I believe them, but without activity proper. What about this receptivity as opposed to the activity of answering a question, of deciding a problem? In this example, the sentences in the newspaper are attentively attended to by the subject, but this attentiveness is accompanied by a certain form of passivity. The reader simply accepts the content of the articles without critically engaging with them. And in this framework, not all activity is position taking. Only those acts that manifest a genuine freedom or agency of the ego can legitimately be called Stellungnahme. Now, importantly, this egoic agency can be unveiled at each phase of the critical process. To begin with, the ego can question her convictions without the emergence of a passive countermotive, as she can always actively cast doubt on any of the beliefs in order to critically assess it. Second, the ego must actively search for compelling evidence in favor of or against the thesis under consideration. In basic perceptual cases, is it a man or a mannequin? Such an activity takes the form of the unfolding of kinestheses, which are likely to unveil new unambiguous sensory data. As Husserl puts it in Experience and Judgment, I quote, we approach what is perceived, perhaps we also set about touching it, and the still doubtful intention oriented towards something wooden instead of a human body acquires a privilege of certainty. It acquires it by the harmonious transition to new appearances which do not accord with the unfulfilled horizons of the apprehension man. As a result, and even though evidence as such remains received and not made, the ego has the power to allow the emergence of evidence through her agency. Finally, the end point of Stellungnahme, namely the decision proper, is also characterized by a specific form of spontaneity. Indeed, the restoration of concordance made possible by the active striving does not put an end to the process of position taking. Rather, the ego must in addition ratify, so to speak, the restored concordance, the evidence. She must sanction, so to speak, the thesis that is now fulfilled. In a 1928 manuscript, Husserl describes this specific last moment as that of acknowledgement, Anerkennung, of the thesis at play. Now, the presentation of these essential structures of Stellungnahme allows to claim that position taking is precisely the missing method of renewal, as depicted in the first part. Performing a position taking first enables us to reach a rational position, either by confirming or dismissing our initial opinion, in accordance, of course, with renewal's purpose. Second, position taking is active in the highest sense of the word, in compliance with the way of renewal. Third and last, position taking is beneficial in that it protects the subject from future deceptions or modelizations, as Husserl makes explicit in Experience and Judgment, for instance. In this context, applying a position taking to all of our acquired beliefs appears as the concrete means to renew or self-regulate ourselves and to attain authentic humanity. Now, since renewal also involves a rationalization of our value propositions, it is needed to show how Stellungnahme can be applied to the axiological domain as well. To this end, I will deepen the three phases that have been presented, so the doubt, the search for evidence, and the decision, in the context of the axiological Stellungnahme. First, an axiological Stellungnahme starts with a value position that appears doubtful. As it is the case in the intellectual sphere, this modelization is usually the result of a passive discordance. Specifically, an affective modelization occurs when the empty feeling anticipations are not fulfilled despite the performance of the relevant kinesthesis, thus leading to an affective disappointment. The analogy with the perceptual case is emphasized in a 1920 manuscript. In the same way as in the doxic case, I have also the value object given by pleasure as the unity of a multiplicity of pleasures, to put it briefly. And then comes the axiological conflict and the devaluation, Entwertung. The whole is then characterized as unvaluable, unwertig. As in the theoretical case, however, the outbreak of a passive affective discordance is not a necessary condition for calling an axiological position into question. Indeed, the mere recognition of a lack of justification with respect to a value thesis is sufficient to initiate a critical procedure. This active axiological questioning is precisely at the heart of renewal as presented in the Kaiser articles. As we've seen, the very risk of a future devaluation, Entwertung, is seen as prompting the subject to secure her axiological convictions in advance, im Voraus, by means of a verification. Let's now turn to the second phase. The axiological Stellungnahme is successful only if it allows the value at stake to manifest itself in originary self-giveness. As Husserl puts it in his 1908 lectures on ethics, every affective intention can be completely fulfilled. But in what precise sense can an intentional feeling be phenomenologically characterized as evident as opposed to empty? I contend that the crucial element here concerns the connection between intentional feelings and what Husserl calls Gefühlsempfindungen, or affective sensations. In this context, he opposes those valuings that are cold, that is, are devoid of accompanying sensible bodily feelings, and those, especially delight, that are hot, that is, that are precisely embodied by certain Gefühlsempfindungen. Now, Husserl claims, for instance, in Ideas 2 or in First Philosophy, that it is only in hot intentional feelings that an authentic givenness of the value occurs. A manuscript published in Studien 2 illustrates this idea. If I take delight in, genieße, the cigar, the noble Havana taste is beautiful, noble in itself, and this is immediately perceived. The cigar itself is thereby not merely supposed, vermeint, as good, but I see, as it were, that it is good, as having the noble taste. And this seeing fulfills the appraisal of the cigar as good. In this perspective, only embodied emotions in the form of delights have the power to fulfill and thus justify a value position. As Husserl asserts again in 1931, the fulfillment in delight is verification, Bewährung, which legitimizes or unlegitimizes, berechtigt, entrechtigt, the affective intention. Now, in order for the critical Stellungnahme to apply to the affective sphere, it is required that such an emotional fulfillment can be actively sought. And here, Husserl, in fact, draws again on the analogy between Wahrnehmung and Wahrnehmung. As we've noticed, actively verifying a perceptual position amounts to performing the relevant kinesthesis, which lead to the sensory fulfillment of its empty intentions. Now, in many texts, Husserl contends that value intentions present the very same structure. The value object is indeed affectively present as a unity of a multiplicity of pleasures, that is, as a system of affective implications that can be brought to fulfillment under certain kinesthetic circumstances. To take a very basic example, to apprehend an apple as good is to anticipate that if I eat it, I will experience gustatory sensations of pleasure. And as a result, to return to the originary givenness of value, the ego must follow the kinesthetic path leading to the expected pleasures and verify that she genuinely experiences them. Now, this interactive engagement can take many forms depending on the nature of the value being assessed. The subject may turn to the valued object, touch it, play with it, or even punch it. These examples are in the second volume of the Studien. One final step remains now to complete the parallelism between theoretical and affective Stellungnahme. As we've emphasized, the position-taking process ends with an act of acknowledgement. But is there something similar? Is there a similar form of egoing ratification in the affective? Certainly, and Husserl even has a specific term for it, namely the term Billigung, or approval. Basically, suppose I experience an initial intentional feeling directed at an object. For example, I experience the nobility of a behavior in an initial act of admiration. Now, I may want to check whether such a value experience is justified or not. And to do so, I need to achieve an originary giveness of the value in the form of a genuine embodied delight, as we've mentioned. If I succeed in doing so, initial valuing is made evident. Yet, in this context, to properly approve of the valuing at stake, I must, in addition, actively endorse this evaluation. That is, I have to recognize or sanction its validity. At the same time, Husserl stresses that the act of approval is itself an affective act, in that it is a liking, Gefallen, of the rightness, Richtigkeit, of the initial act. In brief, and as a result, Billigung can be defined as an affective ratification of the validity of an affective act. I now come to my conclusion. I have attempted to show that the Kaiser papers present the purpose, the way, and benefits of renewal, but not the concrete means to be carried out in order to achieve it. I have then claimed that the operation of Stellungnahme or position taking, understood as a critical procedure, is precisely the specific method that enables us to rationalize our intentional acts. Such a rationalization is actively performed and protects us, as far as it is possible, from future deception, and specifically in the affective domain, from future devaluations and Wertungen. However, I must stress that this process has limitations. Not all values can be rationalized, apparently. Here I am thinking in particular to love values, and Husserl in his later text describes these Liebeswerte as both absolute and subjective, and even go as far as to acknowledge that there is an irrationality of the absolute ought. In this context, further work is needed to articulate Husserl's, so to speak, official rationalism, of which renewal and Stellungnahme are the ultimate expressions, and the conception of values that emerges in these manuscripts. I thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Alexis, and a very, very interesting presentation, and thank you for staying with us so late for you. And do you have a question? Yeah, Irina has a question. Can you please come closer to the computer because we have technical issues.
Can you hear me, Alexis?
Perfectly, thanks.
Thank you very much for your awesome talk. So I have many questions, but I'll just ask two. So I'm curious how you define renewal. Like, what is renewal for you? So from this sentence, you say, for example, at some point, renewal leads to profound satisfaction. So it feels to me like you're saying that one can reach renewal, and from this position that they reached, you know, this position of renewal that they reached is experienced as, you know, some sort of satisfaction. And I just didn't hear that way of talking about renewal before. So I'm just curious how you define, like, what is renewal for you? Like, what, you know? And then you give the example with a cigar, and you conclude something which seems to be that it's your interpretation. So you say that only embodied appraisals can fulfill verification, can offer a fulfilled verification. So this seems to me to be your interpretation. I'm curious if Husserl would say that, because, like, I'm thinking, for example, like, if I have that cigar that Husserl is talking about, I can assure you, I will not have the experience. Like, I will not know whether it's a good cigar or not. But you know, it's like it's not an embodied. It's not like the body itself. You know, it's not the embodiment itself that determines the capacity of this knowledge, of the quality of something. But it's a different kind of knowledge. Okay, and now I'm seeing myself looking ridiculous out there. Sorry. So it's like, you know how, like, someone like who's a wine taster, you know, if you don't know wine, you cannot tell whether, like, a glass of, like, a particular wine is good or not, right? So you cannot have that fulfillment or whatever it's called, verification. So that it just seems to me that it's not the body that does the work. Thank you.
I think that's one of the examples that Husserl gives exactly about the tasting of food.
Yeah, but so this is what I'm curious. Does he say
I found that, sorry, I don't want to take your time, but I found that those examples regarding the verification, mostly with food and the example of the gourmet, like and the person who is like.
But we can have, I think that we can have verification of.
Okay, we
Anyway,
hear him,
sorry.
and then if you want to stay here in case you want to answer. So, Alex.
Yeah, thank you very much for your two very interesting questions, and very, I mean, yeah, difficult to answer in that they are very structuring. So first, the definition of renewal. Well, precisely, in my understanding, renewal is never really defined in the Kaiser papers. I mean, it's a kind of task. We understand the motivations of renewal. We understand what it's supposed to lead us. But precisely that was a bit my point. Like, okay, we know these aspects of renewal, but what is this concretely? And I've tried to put it in the terms of the means of renewal. If we define renewal as through its end, like the final definition, we say that renewal is the task that should lead every individual and humanity as a whole to the complete rationalization of all their acts and their actions in particular. So that would be the most general definition. And then the concrete means lack in this approach. So that's the gap I wanted to fill precisely. Regarding the profound satisfaction, it's precisely the outputs, I would say, of renewal. It's a positive effect that we would experience in case we manage to attain it, or precisely because the rationalization protects us, from future deceptions. So I don't know if my answer is really satisfactory to you, but please let me know if there is a precise point I could delve into. Regarding the cigar, yeah, it's my interpretation, and in the papers that I mentioned in the PowerPoint that I published recently, I of course provide textual evidence for this interpretation, and I really think it's something that the student help demonstrate. In ideas 2 and in first philosophy, the idea is presented, but it's not examined in detail. And in the student, there are much more examples that show that precisely the absence of an embodied emotion, I would say, even though Husserl does not use the term emotion, he says Gefühl, but the absence of such embodied emotions, the absence of genuine Gefühlsempfindungen, preclude the experience to be genuinely a givenness of the value. It's a necessary condition to have these embodied sensations. Of course, it's not sufficient. It's not sufficient. To experience the wine, for example, as good, I must have a presentation of the wine. I must have a representation, a Vorstellung, in the general sense of the word, because, of course, every intentional feeling as a non-objectifying experience is based on an objectifying experience. So if you just have the embodied feelings, you don't even have an evaluation, because it's an intentional act and it requires this Vorstellung. But it's a necessary condition. If you don't have it, for example, the wine taster, as you mentioned, it can have an abstract, so to speak, knowledge of the goodness of the wine. He knows that such and such year was very good for this or this kind of wine. And he says, on this basis, it's good. But it's an empty valuation for me. Also, I think you would say that. And the same with the cigar. You see the cigar, you say, oh, this is a very good brand of cigar. And from this, you infer, so to speak, that it's a good cigar. But you don't have the embodied emotion, that the good taste, and precisely in this perspective, you don't have really a fulfilled valueception.
Thank you. We don't have much time. I really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you. And I just have a very short question before moving to the next conference. Because you talk about position taking, a critical process about doubt and calling into question, but it's not very clear to me which would be the difference between position taking and deciding oneself for something. So it will be, in the case of renewal, this position taking would be the prior step before taking, like making a decision or making up my mind. Is the position taking like a synonym for Entscheidung, for decision? And then you talk about impure decisions, which are different from the position taking, from Stellungnahmen. So impure decisions would be, according to your presentation, would be like irrational decisions, like a way to, because you said they are arbitrary resolutions of doubt, so they would be like unmotivated or irrational resolutions of doubt, like I decide myself for one of the options, even though this is not justified. But you can actually decide yourself for something that is not rational. I don't know. So.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for your question. In fact, it's a very good question because I think that the term Entscheidung is again very ambiguous. Sometimes Husserl uses it only for the final moment of the Stellungnahme process, and sometimes he uses it, and especially in the Studien, as a synonym for the whole process. So it can mean either the precisely the approval or the acknowledgement in the theoretical sphere, or it can correspond to the whole process. And so yeah, and this Entscheidung can be either impure or pure. Well, and I agree with what you said. If you take an arbitrary decision, if you have still a form of doubt, but you decide yourself for a side or another side, this is an impure in some sense. At least there is a residue of irrationality in your choice or in your decision. And precisely, I think that renewal involves the absence of such irrational decision because they have no basis, no foundation, so to speak, no justification, or only partial justification. And I think in political cases, it's very clear. He cites this example at the beginning of the first article in the Kaiser, the first Kaiser article precisely. And we experience this kind of irrational choice when we do not have real evidence for one side or for the other side, and we must decide. We decide in the end, but it's an impure decision, and I think it's a quite good illustration of this. And renewal would precisely enables us to avoid this kind of decisions. And he says at some point that these decisions are form of bad logical conscience. And I think it's again the same. The same.
So I think it's a very important topic because one question that one may pose regarding Husserl's conception of practical reason is whether irrational decisions are based on failures or mistakes, or just like the result of a decision to really act irrationally. But for Husserl, I think for, as far as I understand, there must be some kind of error or mistake in the consideration of the states of affairs, or the perceptual, the way you perceive the situation, or maybe the way you apprehend it emotionally, or the value of the situation. Yeah, so it's an important and tricky topic. But thank you very much. And now we are going to
Thank you so much.
We can continue talking about these things in another occasion. So
Yeah, sure.
So,
And Julia, I saw your question in the chat, but perhaps I will answer to you.
Julia had a question.
But,
Yeah, and then we go to Irene.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, I answer it now. So I read it. The connection between love and testimony, that love is an active decision of the Gemüt. Yeah, thank you very much. In fact, I think there is no problem to understand love as an active decision, but I think what lacks in love is precisely something as a form of rational evidence that can be shared by all human beings. There is this universality is really lacking here. We cannot ask someone to love a child as much as the mother loves a child. And so the value of the child will be less significant for a random guy than for a mother. I think that's the problem of these love values that are not shareable as normal values or other values in the frame of the Göttingen lectures and manuscripts are supposed to be, at least in most domains of values, even for the cigar, I think. So yeah, I think that's what is really lacking, and which, since evidence is lacking, the second step of the Stellungnahme cannot be really achieved. And then, of course, the third step is also prevented. And then, of course, the rationality of the evaluation cannot be attested, I would say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So yes, you will receive our emails with many questions. And now we will hear Irene Breuer. Who are you there? Irene? Yeah, you are there. Thank you for being there. It's already so late now. And how is it? De convertir en coanfitriona. Irene, te hicimos coanfitriona.
Sí, gracias. Ahora me escuchan.
So Irene will present a paper entitled Aristotle and Husserl on the Ethical Value of Love. Irene will present in English, right? And so yeah, we hear you. Thank you for waiting.
So thank you, Celia, and all the organizers for having me here. And the questions can be posed in English or in Spanish. Okay, this presentation concerns both Aristotle's notion of right feelings and Husserl's account of intentional feelings and emotions as developed in their ethical writings, and discusses these approaches in relation to each other. In particular, it focuses on the emotional states of philia and love, as well as the inherent relationship between affectivity and reason. The paper concludes with some reflections on the requirements for the constitution of a moral self. Let us begin with a short introduction that summarizes its main arguments. Aristotle's ethics is centered on arete, a Greek term that encompasses both excellence and virtue. The ultimate telos for Aristotle is human happiness, eudaimonia, that is, a flourishing human life as realized in the exercise of the virtues. While Aristotle's ethical theory is taken as representative of the so-called virtue ethics, the Husserlian phenomenological tradition is basically axiological in character, although it assumes the features of a virtue ethics in the Aristotelian sense in its later period. Both Aristotle and Husserl agree that virtue is fundamentally based on the affective attachment to the other. Friendship and love are not sporadic emotions, but are emotional states involving choice and reason that form the basis of a shared life in search of happiness. Moreover, the identity of the moral self is also fundamentally bound to a reciprocity in virtuous actions, because only on such grounds may an ethos as shared and common customs or habitualities be built up. Reciprocity is thus the necessary condition for a shared eudaimonia. I come to Aristotle. The Greek term arete encompasses excellence and virtue and oscillates between the morally commendable and the personally recommendable. Aristotle describes virtue in the rhetoric as a faculty of providing and preserving good things, or a faculty of conferring many great benefits and benefits of all kinds on all occasions. He distinguishes among the desirable goods a narrower sense of virtue, restricting virtues to praiseworthy states of character. Among them, he lists justice, courage, temperance, magnificence, magnanimity, liberality, gentleness, prudence, phronesis, wisdom, Sophia. Accordingly, the virtues, so Aristotle in the Nicomachean Ethics, are defined as a state of character in virtue of which we stand well or badly with reference to the passions. Virtues are a hexis, a state of character that manifests itself in choice or preference, that is, a disposition or habit to act in accordance with the conception of happiness. In the wake of Plato, Aristotle claims that these rational desires are directed to the good, to agathon, which for him is equivalent to happiness. Aristotle defines virtues as disposition to feel and act according to deliberate desire, boulesis. Hence, the subject must have knowledge and must choose, must be able to choose, so that correct judgment and correct feelings are required. A choice is appropriate when we hit the mean. Excellence, says Aristotle, then, is a state concerned with choice, lying in a mean relative to us, this being determined by reason and in the way in which the man of practical wisdom would determine it. End of quote. The doctrine of the mean is a major achievement of the reflective study of human conduct, since it is essential to determine the moral goodness of a subject. Virtue combines thus the excellence of character and of practical reason. Eudaimonia is thus the activity of the soul in accordance with the best and most noble virtue. Come to philia. Philia are the very strongest affective relationships that human beings form. Friends are most necessary with a view to living. Aristotle defines friendship, philia, as a mutually acknowledged and reciprocal affection that exists between separate individuals who mutually respect and share an interest in each other on the basis of virtue, that is, wish the other well for their own sake, pleasure, or utility. In Aristotle's words, goodwill seems then to be a beginning of friendship, as the pleasure of the eye is the beginning of love. End of quote. As argued in Plato's Symposium, we are first struck by a beautiful body as a source of pleasure. Aristotle distinguishes three types of friends. There are some that are loved for the sake of pleasure, and some others that are useful as tools for the sake, that is, for the sake of utility. Such friendships, however, tend to break up easily. Finally, there are others that, being alike in excellence, that is, in virtue, are necessary and intrinsic part of happiness. That is, they are necessary for the sake of the good. Philia forms the basis for a shared life when they live together, spend their time together, delight in each other, and interchange words and deeds. Moreover, the good man needs friends insofar as happiness is essentially a shared good. The effectiveness of philia is a product of joint action. Aristotle emphasizes the need both for reciprocity in feelings, thought, and deeds, and for mutual harmonization of character, which in conjunction ultimately lead to the formation of social and affective bonds. Among these bonds, he includes not only voluntary associations, but also the non-chosen relations that exist among family members and citizens. Hence, friends are not only instrumental to happiness, as each subject owes both their actions and their nobility to the other, but are an intrinsic part of it. Eudaimonia, as such, is a self-sufficient good, something that is pursued for its own sake. Achieving this state requires excellent activity in accordance with a rational principle. But since perception or understanding is characteristic of the human life, and the friend is another self or an alter ego, the consciousness of a friend's life would be a kind of self-consciousness. The happy man, says Aristotle, needs to be conscious of the existence of his friends as well. A virtuous man requires friends not only for the sake of self-consciousness, but also to perceive his own goodness, for this entails an awareness of one's own excellence. A good life requires reciprocity not only in virtuous actions, but in the awareness of the other as duplicated one's own excellence, and as responding to it. In summary, self-awareness as moral agent is impossible without this other self. It is with respect to this that in books 8 and 9 of the Nicomachean Ethics and book 7 of the Eudemian Ethics, we find Aristotle justifying and explaining the possibilities of a generous eudaimonism. A friend, says Aristotle, is another self, insofar as he is related to his friend as to himself. Therefore, says Aristotle, the good man should be a lover of the self, for he will both himself profit by doing noble acts and will benefit his fellows. Such a man, that means that there is a homological relationship between friendship and the relation to oneself. The relationship to a friendship has the same form as the relationship to oneself, insofar a friend is a second self. Such a man that loves himself as he loves his friends is not hedonistic, not self-assertive. This rather means that the man who seeks what is noble and obeys his reason pursues his own good, which is inseparable from that of the one his actions intend. This interpretation is reinforced by the fact that, as stated above, a friend is needed for the sake of self-awareness and self-perception, not only in the sense of the individualities of character, but also for individual virtuous subjects. In conclusion, activity for the sake of nobility constitutes the best sort of happiness, which is achieved through virtuous actions aiming principally at friends. Love, like any other virtuous emotional disposition, is a rationally informed and affectively guided intentional state that is voluntarily chosen for the sake of happiness. Moreover, friendship grants us self-perception and self-awareness by combining altruistic and self-assertive features. Friendship is thus intrinsically and necessary not only to happiness, but also to the constitution of an individual self. Aristotle's concern with right feelings is taken up in Husserl's account of intentional feelings and emotions, which latter also addresses the motivations and justifications of feelings and actions in a moral sense. I come to the third point, Husserl's ethics. The Husserlian phenomenological tradition is basically axiological in character, although it assumes the features of a teleological ethics in the Aristotelian sense in its later period. Starting from a deontological conception, Husserl ultimately develops a theory of values that is tied to overvaluing being a good person and leading the best possible life. Plato and Aristotle and Husserl, unlike Kant, are not concerned with the perspective of a rational agent in general, but with human excellence and goodness as comprising both emotional as well as rational capacities that are expressed in feelings and actions. Husserl's early ethics, which was developed in his lecture courses on axiology and ethics from the winter semester of 1908-09 and the summer semester of 1911 and 14, is characterized by a search for analogue to the forms and laws of the intellect and in its acts. He develops the idea of an analogy between forms of emotional and volitional rationality. The objectivity and truth of these are themselves analogous to those of the act of thinking. In fact, Husserl maintains the evident absolute validity of Brentano's categorical imperative in the sphere of willing that says, do the best attainable. This imperative, a noetic expression, is to be made into a law of the subject's willing. A certain value is thereby acknowledged as the best on the basis of a correctly motivated and maximally evident will, as Aristotle's conception of boulesis demands. In the wake of Plato and Aristotle, Husserl emphasized that this imperative allows for inclination and preference insofar as what we ought to choose is founded on value, a value determined not by our intellective consciousness, but by our emotive or feeling consciousness. Hence, Husserl's axiology is, contrary to Kant's, a logic of the heart, Gemüt, based on the relation of the heart to what appears as good and bad. The personal I decides to rule and shape its life according to the categorical imperative. Here a thought central to Husserl's ethics emerged, namely the Aristotelian notion of a rational self-regulation of the whole of life based on the recognition of what is truly good, a notion that determines my own identity as an ethical subject. But soon Husserl realized that poor axiological laws do not provide the material value content necessary to justify ethical choices. This new orientation amounts to a putting into question of this ethical rationalism based on the categorical imperative. This acknowledgement also implies a change in the ontology of the person. The deepest being of the person is not to be found in reason, but in love. Husserl takes up these issues in his later writings on the ontology of spirit or of personal life, developed in schizo articles from the 1920s and related ones published in Husserliana 27 and Husserliana 37. He does not renounce to his formal axiological ethics, but rather grounds it on an affective structure, the subjective values of love. Husserl emphasizes that personal life is determined by pre-egoical striving tendencies, which express themselves in knowledge intentions as a striving for clarity and fullness, and which are articulated in actions of will that aim at obtaining what is desired. The ultimate end of this ideal life form is a state of fulfilled happiness, Glückseligkeit, that is, of eudaimonia in an Aristotelian sense. The task of ethics is to unveil the aims of our strivings and find the means to realize them. Much in Aristotelian terms, Husserl defines happiness as a blessed total life, a consistent life which in all its intention, in all its strivings, would run permanently in the form of pure fulfillment. Such a state is not achievable for human beings, since our life is characterized by the fortuitousness of factual life that may inhabit such a state. Although Husserl, like Aristotle, claims that virtuous acts conform with the kind of second nature of the person, this is not passively acquired in a process of habituation, as Aristotle claims. Virtue rather requires the ego to be the causa sui of its own morality to the extent that it is determined and directed towards being thus by itself, on the grounds of a self-evaluation and self-determining of the ego. Virtues are thus to be distinguished from the original moral tendencies in personal life from which they arise. However, in his ethic course of the 20s, he claims that authentic virtuous acts, eigentliche Tugendakte, are performed without reflection and are grounded on the former as the original founding of a self-normalization, Selbstnormierung, and self-creation, Selbstschöpfung, of a moral ego. These virtuous acts display the habitual moral will of the person. They are virtuous in the Aristotelian sense, insofar as they are actualized in actions. Moral virtues then require self-adequation, a self-enhancing of the ego, and hence a critical self-reflection through which the personal I can arrive at a higher form of consciousness and can reorganize its whole life accordingly. Husserl calls this process renewal, Erneuerung. This renewal aims at the authentic person, a person that can have or experience values. To experience them, it has to feel emotions. The experiencing of affective values is required in order to hear the call of the absolute ought that consists in leading a purposeful and active life guided by truth, reason, and rightness, and in accordance with our best possible capacities and conscience. In a word, the telos is not absolute reason, but reason relative to the best possible life, to each subject's nature, and to the material state of affairs in which the person is already situated, as Aristotle's theory of mesotes demands. Listening to this call is answering to our positive drives in their search for positive values, guided not only by practical reason, but also by pure love. In this connection, Husserl claims that the values of the person or values of love are the highest values, says in Husserliana 42. Feelings, and particularly love, ground the constitution of all values and allow for the realization of the values of the person. They encompass both individual personal values that are centered in self-love, Selbstliebe, and social personal values, personale Werte, that concern the love of neighbor, Nächstenliebe. Much in accordance with Aristotle, Husserl claims that even though egoistic self-love is not true love, it is self-enjoyment, both love types are not incompatible, provided that the others are not used as mere means to an end. On the contrary, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Here, love is understood in the Christian sense of agape and not in the sense of philia, which are addressed to particular individuals that are chosen for their beauty of spirit. In Aristotle's wake, Husserl argues that once these emotional reactions become a habitus, they give rise to an intentionality of the emotional state, the Intentionalität des Gemütszustandes, that constitutes a positive mood, a mood of contentment, Stimmung der Zufriedenheit. Not only moods, but also virtuous acts become habitus, the latter through sedimentation of acts that predelineate new acts, engendering thus the intentionality of moral acts and self-contentment. Self-contentment and happiness, which are essentially tied to their loving care or solicitude for others, are the final stages in this teleological development. While Husserl does not develop this point, the ethical love is not divorced from an altruistic goodwill towards the others. If a community as a personality of higher order is united by ethical love, then what is good for the others is represented as part of my individual life horizon, so that wanting someone else's good as my own good and for his own sake enlarges the scope of my own pursuit of a true life to embrace the other's search, thus building up the basis of a generous eudaimonism in Aristotelian terms. Come to the conclusion. Husserl agrees with Aristotle that authentically virtuous acts require reflection about the appropriateness of our emotions and our actions. They require deliberation, since for Aristotle, virtues are states of character or disposition to act according to deliberate desire and guided by reason. Virtues always involve, as part of their justification, a critical reflection or evaluation of the correctness of our value attributions and of the motivations that condition our emotional responses and thus lead to the endorsement of value. Moreover, they involve a rational evaluation of the means conducive to our aims and of the particular circumstances of the situation and the individual possibilities at our disposal. Hence, both philosophers agree that virtuous emotional dispositions are rationally informed and effectively guided intentional states that are voluntarily chosen for the sake of happiness. Ya termino. They also agree on what constitutes authentic virtuous acts. Such acts are performed without reflection because they exhibit the habitual moral will of the person. These experiences and actions allow not only for knowledge of oneself, but also for the constitution of the moral self. Self-awareness as moral agent is impossible without the other self. Friends and love for others are required for the constitution of self-consciousness and self-perception, insofar as it is through love that we become not only conscious of a friend's life and our shared feelings and actions, but of our own excellence as well. One's own awareness as moral agents is dependent on the awareness of the other as duplicating one's own excellence. Our commitment to others, which Husserl acknowledges cannot always be fully rationally justified, is the source of our personal self-constitution as virtuous subjects. Love is thus primarily a self-apprising emotion. That means that while intentional feelings like pleasure or displeasure ground our pre-reflective self-awareness, love as a stable emotion is the source of our reflective awareness as moral persons, and insofar as it allows for personal self-constitution, love fulfills a transcendental function. In conclusion, love requires reciprocity in actions and feelings. This means love as an activity of the self requires to be embedded in the communitarian search for a good life, wherein what is good for others becomes part of an individual life horizon. Hence, while disinterested love is the basis of virtue, reciprocal love is the primary source of shared eudaimonism at the communitarian level and of self-constitution and self-awareness as moral agents at the individual level. In conclusion, love and philia not only permeate our choices and actions, but fundamentally allow for our personal self-constitution and self-awareness as moral persons. Thank you for your attention, and sorry if I transgressed a little bit at the time. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Irene. Thank you very much, Irene. If anyone has a question for her. ¿Alguien tiene una pregunta? Ok, Marcela y Elisa. Ah, Elisa está aplaudiendo. Marcela, ¿estás aplaudiendo o quieres hacer una pregunta? No entendí. Bueno. Una confusión. Mi mamá tiene una pregunta. No, yo no estoy. Ok, ¿alguien aquí tiene una pregunta para Irene? Ah, bien, Marcela te estaba aplaudiendo.
Gracias.
Bueno, ok, no sé si hablar en español. I don't know if I continue in English now. There are some people who doesn't speak Spanish. So thank you. Muy insistente. Perdón. Las madres son muy insistentes. No, just a short question. We don't have much time because we have to move straight to the last conference of the day. But so just very shortly, what do you think about the role of love specifically in the CAISO essay? So the role of love and critique, like this idea of self-regulation. ¿Cómo entendés la relación entre el valor ético del amor y el concepto de renovación? En renovación.
Sí, entendí, gracias. Es una muy buena pregunta y muy válida. I think that the link is given by the experiencing of affective values. The experiencing of affective values is required in order to hear the absolute oath that consists in leading a purposeful life and active life guided by truth, reason, and rightness, says Husserl in his CAISO article. So that if the essays on renewal put the accents on an ethical life as a renewal of humans, these renewals of humans is I would say is founded, yes, and guided by the idea of, or by our feeling consciousness, that is, by the experiences of affective values, so that affective values form the basis upon which values are being built up, so that without these affective values, there would be no renewal, or there would be no possibility to ground these higher values. So the values are just the basis, or the foundational basis, of all the positing of further values. I don't know if I've been clear.
Yeah.
I've tried to be.
Yes, I just my question is mainly motivated because one of the possible readings of the CAISO essays is a reading which emphasizes only the critical aspect, meaning reflection and self-regulation understood as an intellectual achievement. And actually, when Husserl begins explaining the genetical process of renewal, and he speaks about vocation, for instance, It says there that vocation is a pre-ethical form of self-regulation, and the beginning of the process of renewal is self-consciousness, self-meditation, and self-education, many selves, like.
Yes, but he also is very clear. I have just the quotation if you want to look it up, because I happen to have it here. He says that listening to the call of the absolute odd is not only answering to our positive drives in the search for positive values, he says, but also guided, not only guided by practical reason, but also, he says, by pure love. And he says this in page 28. So it's not only a rational justification of values, but these values are grounded on on affective structure, such that the emotional values or the emotional state of affairs is the foundation. Affectivity is the foundation of reason.
I agree with you, but
So
like
I
think
think
it's an interesting aspect, because there has been lately a discussion about critical phenomenology, and it's something that is going on right now. Like there are some debates regarding the critical potential of phenomenology. And so this idea of reflection and critiques and what does actually reflection means phenomenologically for classical phenomenology, I think it's important. And one of the reasons is because of this affective foundation that you underline. So thank you, Irene. And
thank you, Celia. And sorry if I was a little bit
no,
over my.
Sorry, Luisa has a commentary or a question. She said, reason and relation, okay, is similar in both philosophers. May I say that philia and agape differentiate them, as Aristotle is more concerned with ethics and politics, and Husserl about ethical life, reason, and community?
No, I think that philia and agape are quite different reasons, because philia addresses a person in its individuality, while agape is just the love for humanity in general. So that is the basic distinction. But also Husserl does not only claim for love in the sense of agape, but he is very, very clear about the love as friendship and love between, for example, a mother and a child, between members of the community. So both think that the aim of ethics is eudaimonism, happiness, a state of blessedness. Yes, and it is achieved, yes, through our emotional consciousness and through the participation with friends and with emotions shared with friends, and desiring having goodwill towards the other. This is having or desiring the good for the others as one desires it for oneself, is the way to establish a relationship of friendship, yes, which is the most important ones, because pleasure and utility may not last, but the search for the good of the other person and the friendship, which is based on wanting something good for the other person, lasts a lot longer. So it forms the basis for stable relationships, not only within the personal cycle of friends, but also in a community and in politics too. So he is very clear in Book 10, for example, Aristotle, about the importance of of friendship in political terms, yes, of building up a polis. So it is very clear for Aristotle, as it is also for Husserl.
Gracias, Irene. Muchas gracias.
Thank you all for your questions.
Y gracias a todos los que los que hicieron preguntas, y hoy aprendí a distinguir el aplauso de la mano. Bueno, y ahora vamos a comenzar con la última conferencia del día de hoy, que es la conferencia de cierre del día a cargo del profesor Roberto Walton, que lo invitamos a subir al estrado. No tenemos todavía todas las condiciones óptimas, aquí, por ejemplo, no tenemos refrigeración, así que todo así. No quiero sentarse acá, así que está cerca de la... No, bueno, entonces le acerco la computadora para que se escuche bien. Así sabe que si se habla acá, se va a escuchar. Se habla cerca del... ¿Cómo? Ya comenzamos.
¿Ya comenzamos?
Lo que pasa es que, no sé, ¿podemos cortar 5 minutos?
No,
¿Está bien?
empezamos.
Bueno, entonces empezamos. Sí, lamentablemente por el tema de el problema que tuvimos con la conexión no podemos tomarnos una pausa, pero lo importante es que tenemos al profesor Walton acá y que nos va a... Bueno, muchas gracias, profesor, porque es un momento difícil del año en el que ya estamos todos terminando, cercanos a las fiestas, y bueno, Val y yo les pedimos que hablen del Husserl y de la renovación. El trabajo del profesor Walton, que no requiere presentación, además, bueno, le agradecemos porque nos apoya en esta iniciativa. Se llama Huellas de Rudolf Eucken en la fenomenología de Edmund Husserl. Muchas gracias, profesor. Tiene
Gracias.
la palabra.
Gracias. En esta exposición de Sofía de Rudolf Eucken y especificaciones en los escritos tardíos de Husserl. Husserl examina diferentes niveles de la historia y del desarrollo de la razón. En primer lugar, respecto de la protohistoria, el análisis se centra en la autopreservación instintiva que exhibe una razón latente a la que es inherente la estructura, intención, cumplimiento con su particular modalización. En segundo lugar, en el ámbito de la historia afectiva, personal y comunitaria, una autopreservación práctica de los sujetos individuales y comunalizados se vincula con una razón práctica que tiene su propia verdad y modalización. En tercer lugar, la historia racional como una segunda historicidad es el reino de una razón absoluta y una verdadera autopreservación en que la estructura, intención, cumplimiento se aplica a los más elevados niveles en el incremento del conocimiento y los valores, de modo que la ciencia y la ética se convierten en conceptos de igual valor respecto de la razón práctica. Estos niveles se encuentran antecedentes en los escritos sobre la renovación, por medio de su referencia a tipos formales de cultura en la evolución de la humanidad. Se distinguen la vida animal de acuerdo a meros instintos, la vida humana en variadas formas culturales, con tradiciones contingentes y cambiantes costumbres, y la exigencia de elevar, dice Husserl, a la humanidad en su conjunto a un estadio nuevo en lo que hace a todo su vivir y todo su obrar, por medio de la forma genérica de cultura racional en la racionalidad científica, la forma de la racionalidad filosófica. Esta elevación conduce a la forma de la humanidad ética, en que la autoconciencia ética ha despertado y en que la idea meta que en ella se constituye, la de la humanidad auténtica, determina la educación y la configuración que esta humanidad se da. Los desarrollos posteriores giran en torno de problemas planteados al comienzo del cuarto artículo. Cito: cuestión de si pertenece a la esencia de la colectividad y de la vida colectiva el que solo puedan tomar la forma de la colectividad auténticamente humana a partir de una forma inferior desde la que se eleven al estadio auténticamente humano. Cuestión de los caminos que sirven a este propósito. El tema de la autopreservación aparece mencionado solo una vez en el texto principal de los escritos sobre Renovación y otra vez en el apéndice 2, pero estas reflexiones se presentan en pasajes en que se mencionan temas fundamentales, como la ilimitada infinitud de la vida, la solicitud universal y planificada en relación con ella, las diversas formas de vida entre las cuales sobresale aquella en que la decisión personal se orienta a valores determinantes para la autorregulación de toda la vida personal, mediante una dedicación de la vida futura a la realización de tales valores y las consiguientes metas de la acción que culminan con el amor al prójimo. Una anticipación de esta visión teleológica de la historia, en términos de una autopreservación que se desarrolla desde un nivel inferior a un nivel espiritual, que se impone a la humanidad en un desarrollo que pasa por los tres niveles de la espiritualidad fundante, conflictiva y superadora, y en que el fortalecimiento de la razón se extiende a los dos niveles que precedieron a la espiritualidad superadora, según Oyken. Respecto de este desarrollo, Oyken afirma: así aparece aquí la historia no meramente como un transcurso de diferentes fases, de las cuales una suplanta a las otras, sino como una apertura de movimiento y verdades que se sustentan una junto a la otra y crean una con otra un modo de presente que se superpone al tiempo. Por eso aquí la historia es aquí más que un mero pasado. El camino de Oyken es, como afirma Husserl, con la filosofía de Oyken, porque ve en sus obras tesoros espirituales que incorpora con gratitud y de las que espera aprovechar en futuros trabajos. El rasgo característico de la fenomenología es comenzar con la intuición y luego elevarse desde abajo hacia las alturas y el valor inestimable de la filosofía del espíritu de Oyken. Por eso Husserl, en un borrador de este escrito de homenaje, aclara que, cito, en la comparación de la fenomenología y la filosofía de la vida espiritual, no se trata de contrastes, sino de orientaciones contrapuestas de un único y mismo trabajo. También la fenomenología quiere ser filosofía de la vida espiritual, con agradecimiento y amoroso interés puede acoger el potente trabajo espiritual de Oyken. Husserl reconoce en el pensamiento de Oyken una visión, cito, de la unidad de un curso de vida sustentado en una teleología inmanente en cuyo juego de tendencias supraindividuales de movimiento se revela el ser inmanente de un poder unitario de la razón. Oyken vivió entre 1846 y 1926. Fue profesor en las universidades de Basilea y Viena. En 1908 recibió el Premio Nobel de Literatura. Su esposa Irene, pintora vinculada a la escuela expresionista, y su hijo Walter, economista fundador de la Escuela de Friburgo, de gran influencia en la reconstrucción alemana de posguerra, fueron estrechos amigos de la familia Husserl, como se advierte en muchas cartas familiares. Por ejemplo, se los menciona en primer lugar entre una media docena de amigos de Friburgo, que incluye a Eugen Fink, en una referencia a los asistentes a una fiesta de cumpleaños de Husserl. Punto 1, la autopreservación instintiva. Una primera faceta de este único y mismo trabajo es la alusión de Eucken a que en una lucha incesante a la que no podemos escapar, la preservación sensible de la vida se afirma como la fuerza impulsora más fuerte de la existencia humana. Respecto de este impulso natural de autopreservación, Eucken considera que la vida está dominada desde un principio por una mera autopreservación centrada en el avance de egos aislados. Puesto que no va más allá de algo momentáneo, la vida es incapaz de establecer conexiones. No hay ninguna construcción de relaciones y por ende ningún vínculo con el entorno. La lucha puntual concierne no solo a los individuos, sino también a los diferentes pueblos y a la humanidad como un todo. Para Eucken, un movimiento que comienza con el impulso natural eleva gradualmente desde el estadio inicial a un nivel superior, porque los individuos sustentan en sí mismos, como un don natural, un poder que conduce, dice Eucken, a un sí mismo superior frente a uno inferior, a un todo esencial frente a la dispersión de la superficie, según un progresivo movimiento interno, un escalar hacia arriba a través de diferentes niveles. Para Husserl, la posibilidad de la historia descansa en la vida de los seres humanos en una cadena de generaciones dentro de un mundo familiar con su sedimentación social básica sobre un suelo ofrecido por la tierra. Husserl caracteriza los instintos como los impulsos primitivos, las afecciones primitivas que determinan de una manera esencial y general todo desarrollo. Se refiere a un instinto de autopreservación asociado con una familia de nociones que retornan en niveles superiores de análisis de la historia. El cuidado de los otros y de sí mismo, la esperanza una vez superado un nivel de estancamiento, la visión de la positividad de la vida y la objetivación con su modalización, incremento y habitualización. Y observa que la vida pasiva se deja dar momentáneamente las metas y por ende es pensada siempre en dirección a la autopreservación, pero sin tener una idea de la autopreservación, de la autorregulación como fin general consciente. Punto 2, la historia efectiva. Según Eucken, la actividad humana también está subordinada a la autopreservación, pero aquí, aclara, se trata no de un sí mismo dado que nos encierra en la ciega facticidad de un impulso natural, sino de un sí mismo de la libertad en el que están contenidas nuestras propias obras. El primer desarrollo de la historia emerge cuando se genera un giro hacia la condición objetiva de las cosas junto a una liberación de las circunstancias puntuales y momentáneas. La superación de la estrechez se realiza por medio de una encarnación de la vida espiritual en el mundo sensible y la consiguiente aniquilación de la dispersión natural. La vida espiritual se caracteriza por un impulso a la autopreservación interior, que está movido por una pertenencia a los fundamentos creadores de la realidad, en una lucha que se orienta más allá del reino de la experiencia hacia una profundidad insondable. Un primer estadio de indeterminadas exigencias de vida es seguida por un proceso gradual que se desenvuelve desde un mero esbozo a una plena organización en un movimiento ascendente por el que la vida llega a sustentarse en sí misma. Factores espirituales llegan a diferenciarse claramente y se conectan en un nivel de desarrollo más elevado dentro de un todo interno. En este desarrollo, las contingencias inherentes a las circunstancias se añade a las que se originan en la naturaleza. Así, en un proceso de continua elevación, se establece una relación fundamental con el mundo, según la cual el mundo no está al lado de nosotros, sino dentro de nosotros. Con la ayuda y la incorporación del mundo, la vida espiritual es liberada de las sombras iniciales. Alcanza, dice Eucken, una plena realidad y se convierte en este ser concreto, individual e incomparable. Hoy quien sostiene que en el reino del espíritu la formación esencial pone toda actividad bajo la tarea de la autopreservación. Pero aquí no se trata de un sí mismo dado que nos encierra dentro de la factualidad de un impulso natural, sino más bien de una autolibertad en que están contenidas nuestras propias realizaciones. A fin de superar la inercia de la naturaleza y lo dado, la actividad desplegada por el sí mismo debe mostrar una englobante concepción de unidad, los múltiples elementos del nivel inferior. Debe atraer hacia sí y retener la riqueza de la naturaleza, accediendo a una vida autosuficiente. Solo de esta manera puede el sí mismo adquirir su carácter esencial. Sin abarcar la multiplicidad en una unidad, toda la red de actividades flotaría en el aire y los materiales dados permanecerían dispersos. El punto decisivo es que las fuerzas primordiales y fundamentales contenidas en la naturaleza tienen que ser arrancadas de este nivel y llevadas a un nuevo nivel de esencial autoactividad, que es profundizado en un grado tal que, dice Eucken, es capaz en su propia esfera de desarrollar un modo de ser, de sobreponerse a lo extraño y llevar a una unidad la vida escindida hasta entonces. Este proceso de autodesarrollo conduce a una autoelevación del todo, una convergencia interna, una afirmación de la vida en sí misma, un ascenso a la autoactividad y originalidad y un progresivo avance del esbozo a la configuración plena. A las limitaciones en la tarea de espiritualizarla, ante las limitaciones en la esfera de espiritualizar la realidad, se deben crear formas peculiares, ciencia, arte, un orden legal, mediante la combinación y fusión estrecha de multiplicidades en un impulso unitario. Eucken afirma que el mero uno tras otro de la historia y el mero uno junto a otro de la sociedad deben ser superados una y otra vez, y lo finito y lo sensible deben ser reducidos a mera apariencia. Frente a los contrastes o contingencias, Eucken describe el giro hacia lo espiritual en los siguientes términos. Cito: así su propio obrar no puede satisfacer bien al hombre, y el mundo espiritual en el que arraiga su ser parece perdido para su existencia y vida, pero siempre subsiste aún una perspectiva y una esperanza. Todo lo absurdo e inicuo de nuestro mundo sería soportable si imperara indudable y manifiestamente sobre nosotros un poder superior para la promoción y fortalecimiento del bien, para la obstrucción y quebrantamiento del mal, si el amor y la justicia guiaran nuestro destino, y se diera un giro desde toda la insuficiencia de las situaciones humanas hacia un poder de superior fuerza como un sostén y un consuelo seguros. Concepciones análogas aparecen en Husserl cuando se refiere a una libre autoconfiguración del hombre que conduce a diferentes formas de vida. La idea de Eucken de separar en una visión global una forma esencial de lo inesencial se reitera en Husserl en la exigencia de contemplar toda la vida como una unidad y valorarla por sus realidades y posibilidades. Así el ser humano puede conferir a la vida personal una forma completamente nueva, esto es, proponerse una meta general de vida en que se somete a sí mismo y somete su vida entera con la apertura infinita del futuro a una exigencia reguladora que surge de su propia voluntad libre. En el apéndice 2 a los escritos sobre renovación, contrapone formas de vida. El ser humano puede vivir en la pasividad y seguir fines del momento. También puede vivir pasivamente en una tradición comunitaria. Una forma de vida superior es aquella en que se somete al fin de una profesión. Y al contemplar no solo la profesión, sino la totalidad de la vida, el hombre, dice Husserl en Renovación, el hombre puede configurar para sí una idea afín y acogerla en su voluntad, idea afín que regula cada pulso de su vida, todas y cada una de las actividades personales, de modo que quiero configurar mi vida a partir de la libre voluntad en una vida que sea la mejor posible. La configuración de sí se identifica con la autoadquisición y la autoconservación. Esto implica para el yo una autoherencia y una autogeneración, en virtud de la cual un acto se convierte en hábito, en un proceso de mantenerse a sí mismo. No hay un ser sustancial del sujeto y un sujeto verdadero de la realización de valores en un planteo de tareas y efectuación de tareas, dice Husserl, como parte de un proceso de autoconfiguración y autoelevación. Tercer punto, segunda historicidad y verdadera autopreservación. Para hoy que en el rasgo principal de la vida espiritual es la superioridad de la razón y la visión de que la idea ética no puede plantearse contra las otras tareas como una tarea particular, sino que más bien debería convertirse en la sal de toda la vida. Y de ese modo sacar a los seres humanos y a la humanidad de la inercia de su situación empírica. Esto significa que, cito, solo una cultura moralmente fundamentada garantiza a la vida espiritual una plena superioridad sobre la naturaleza. Aquí la apropiación de la vida espiritual abre un nuevo sí mismo, aquí la originalidad de un nuevo mundo asegura la libertad. Hoy quien examina la autopreservación en términos de un reino de interioridad superpuesto al mundo y un reino de amor que excede al mundo. La vida de los individuos y la humanidad es caracterizada como una lucha incesante entre la libertad y el destino, y un trasladarse a una verdad intemporal, válida en sí misma. Hoy quien se refiere a un giro por medio del cual una vida originaria y libre puede oponerse al destino y, dice, nos convertimos en colaboradores en la construcción de una auténtica realidad. Encontramos instalada en nosotros mismos, en el ahondamiento más profundo, como nuestra propia vida, una vida infinita, eterna, creadora. Una vida esencial irrumpe en la humanidad y se coloca ante todos los hechos y las circunstancias, las cuales a su vez deben estar fundados sobre esta base. El carácter moral de la acción se destruye cuando una orden es impuesta desde afuera y se relaciona con recompensas y castigos. Hoy quien habla de un amor omnipotente que protege y guía a los seres humanos más allá de su conocimiento y voluntad, y subraya que ningún amor auténtico es posible si su objeto, sea un individuo o un todo más amplio, no es incorporado al círculo de la propia vida e incluido en el propio ser. En un tono más personal que en los niveles anteriores, la acción espiritual supera de una manera significativa la autopreservación y cuidado de los seres humanos en los estadios natural y social. En el párrafo final de su obra, La lucha por un contenido espiritual de la vida, Eucken escribe: es asunto de nuestra autopreservación espiritual encontrar un contrapeso suficiente a la amenazadora dispersión y superficialidad. Podemos buscar este contrapeso solo bajo el presupuesto de una profundidad de la realidad. Aparecen en la filosofía de Eucken nociones que Husserl expone como los niveles de la historia, el contraste entre libertad y destino, la superación de las contingencias, una escisión en el yo entre naturaleza y espíritu, la superación de la mera sucesión y coexistencia, el papel fundamental de la ética en la construcción de un nuevo mundo y el presupuesto de una profundidad de la realidad. En los escritos sobre renovación, Husserl dice que cada meditación en profundidad conduce a cuestiones de principio de la razón práctica, que con generalidad de esencia y puramente formal conciernen al individuo y a la colectividad y a la vida racional de la colectividad. Una generalidad esta que deja muy atrás toda facticidad empírica todos los conceptos contingentes. La investigación de profundidad establece que los tipos de personalidades humanas o formas de vida culminan en la forma suprema de valor del hombre ético, porque son inherentes a las figuras a priori de la razón, las figuras normativas de la razón, que exigen una vida que tenga un creciente contenido axiológico y proporcione una satisfacción total. En el apéndice 10 a los escritos sobre Renovación, Husserl señala que la humanidad se ha apartado de su telos innato y que por ser infiel a esta teleología ha caído en una degeneración pecaminosa. Como idea absoluta, concierne al individuo y a la comunidad e implica el cumplimiento del imperativo categórico como exigencia absoluta de realización de lo mejor posible en la conducción de la vida según la razón práctica. Esta posibilidad superior de realización humana se refleja en un sobrepasamiento de los niveles de autopreservación empírica y un acceso al ideal de la absoluta autopreservación. Con un horizonte abierto de posibilidades prácticas, la razón opera en un infinito progreso, como si el horizonte fuera infinito y cada valor alcanzado en el nivel inferior es el presupuesto para valores superiores. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, profesor, por la conferencia. Hay preguntas, aplausos. Aplausos, y además de aplausos hay comentarios o preguntas. En el chat no, y así. Aplausos. Sí, Cristian. Cristian.
Tengo que acercarme. Sí, mejor.
Mejor, sí.
Permiso, que pueda pasar.
Eres uno de nuestros invitados de Chile.
Hola, profesor, bueno, gusto. ¿Acá está bien?
Sí, sí.
Voy a dar la espalda.
¿Querés?
Sí, me voy a sentar acá. Bueno, muchas gracias por su presentación. Es muy interesante ese contacto entre Tolkien y Husserl, y creo que precisamente por también cómo configurar un concepto de vida en base a lo que usted ha dicho. Y por lo mismo yo me preguntaba cuando estudiaba los ensayos de Kaiser, digamos, para mi presentación de esta semana, era ¿qué es precisamente lo que entendía Husserl por el concepto de forma de vida? Porque, como quizás ese concepto es un concepto de Edward Spranger, en ese libro que se llama Lebensformen, y que justamente fue publicado en 1921, o sea, un poquito antes de los ensayos, ¿no? Entonces yo me preguntaba, porque a mí me parece que este concepto es importante, porque parece que Husserl también está haciendo como una especie de diferenciación entre qué significa ser una forma de vida y otra, porque parte diciendo las formas de vida humanas a diferencia de las animales, y esto me llamó mucho la atención, porque inmediatamente parece que hace esa diferenciación. Entonces yo me preguntaba si Husserl utiliza ese concepto preponderantemente, dice también Fox des Lebens, es decir, formas de la vida, además del Lebensform, las dos formas. ¿Por qué le pregunto? Porque si este concepto es básicamente un concepto cultural, es decir, un concepto para definir a la comunidad propiamente humana, o es un concepto quizás que podría ser entendido un poco más amplio y que abarcara a niveles inferiores, digamos, actividades animales, ciertas cosas de ese tipo, tal como lo hace Helmut Plessner en Die Suchen des Organischen, porque él lo hace, y él dice el concepto de Spranger, para decir que todas las formas funcionales, todos los seres vivos, son formas de vida. Quería saber qué piensa usted al respecto de eso, porque a mí me parece que también es interesante para también hablar un poco de cuál es la continuidad que puede existir entre formas no éticas, digamos, o animales, ¿cierto? Y la humanidad como ese ideal de realización ético que usted ha señalado, que culmina en esta sociedad donde está el hombre ético. Muchas gracias, doctor.
Bueno, el concepto de formas de vida está referido específicamente a formas de vida humanas. Es cierto que la comunidad trascendental abarca no solo a los hombres, sino a los animales y también en algún manuscrito perdido a las plantas. Pero los análisis están referidos específicamente a formas de vida humana. Yo creo que las fuentes de inspiración de Husserl ha sido, obviamente, por lo que Husserl dice, Eucken, a pesar de que no lo cita nunca en ninguna obra. La razón puede ser el estilo descriptivo de Husserl y el estilo efusivo, literario de Eucken, que le valió ese premio en 1908. Otra fuente de Husserl a la que se refiere muy fuertemente, creo que en el tomo 30 de Husserliana, es Rickert. Rickert serían los inspiradores. Yo no conozco referencias a Sprang. Sí, me las he olvidado. Pero no es una figura presente. Las formas de vida, como se dice en un texto que yo parafraseé, son primariamente formas de vida pasivas. Ahí uno podría incluir en una acentuación de la pasividad a la vida animal. Luego está la pasividad de la tradición humana, pero a eso se sobrepone una actividad que se manifiesta en primer lugar en la profesión, tema que creo es el de Luis el día de mañana. Y como la profesión solo abarca una parte de la vida y uno tiene que enfrentarse a otras situaciones fuera de la profesión, es necesaria delinear una forma de vida global, que es la forma de vida ética.
O sea, profesor, que hay algo de la universalidad y como el alcance de la forma de vida. O sea, la forma está relacionada con el carácter, cuánto abarca, como cuánto.
Sí,
Digamos,
pero hay
¿cuál es?
formas de vida que tienen un alcance muy limitado, ¿no?
Claro,
Podríamos decir, por ejemplo, el pulidor de vidrios. Es una forma de vida de antecedente histórico, pero no creo que en el día de hoy probablemente eso lo hagan máquinas, así que no.
No, y también
Muy amplio.
tenemos,
Pero ya la profesión abarca, digamos, la totalidad de una vida en un determinado aspecto. Y la ética es, como dice Eucken, la sal de la vida, o como dice Husserl, la ciencia áurea, es decir, la ciencia que tiene que guiar a todas las demás ciencias. O sea, entonces, formas de vida, los antecedentes, Eucken y Rickert, y su extensión a los animales es una cuestión muy dejada de lado, digamos, por Husserl, a pesar de que la comunidad trascendental los incluye en la medida en que ellos tienen también una experiencia del mundo.
profesor, esa forma de vida animal implica es una forma de autorregulación,
Claro.
que es
Sí.
una autorregulación
Una vez que
pasiva.
se pasa al nivel de la profesión y al nivel más alto ético, sí, es una forma de autorregulación. En los niveles inferiores, la regulación viene dada por el instinto o viene dada por la tradición histórica, la tradición social.
Es como una especie de concepto de normatividad, ¿no? Una norma que, aunque no sea asumida reflexivamente, ¿no?
Hay, claro, sí, una norma.
Una norma. En el chat tenemos dos preguntas. Una es de Luisa, que dice si se podría relacionar por medio de Eucken el pensar de Husserl con el ascenso plotiniano a lo uno.
No recuerdo en este momento referencias muy explícitas de Eucken a Plotino. Tampoco soy un vasto conocedor de la obra de Eucken. Pero sí, obviamente, ¿no? Hay un ascenso de la multiplicidad a lo uno, y ese ascenso de la multiplicidad a lo uno, que tiene sus estratos intermedios, por ejemplo, en la vida espiritual, tal como se manifiesta en el arte, en en la filosofía o en cualquier disciplina del mundo espiritual, pasa luego a lo que se llama la profundidad de la vida. Y esa profundidad de la vida tiene connotaciones en Eucken altamente religiosas.
Bien. Y la última pregunta es de Rodrigo Mendoza. Dice, gracias, profesor Walton, un honor. ¿Es la autopreservación el fundamento de la responsabilidad ética cognoscitiva?
En el plano superior de la autopreservación, es decir, de la autopreservación absoluta, la ética y con el avance del conocimiento. Está relacionada sobre todo con la Besinnung, es decir, la toma de conciencia del sentido de la vida humana. Es muy interesante el título de una de las obras de Eucken, El sentido y el valor de la vida. Si recordamos el texto 24 de Husserliana 42, tiene más o menos ese mismo título, ¿no? El valor de la vida, ¿no?
Sí, una pregunta que es más una curiosidad sobre Eucken porque no lo conozco, y otra es una pregunta más de contenido de Husserl. Por cómo formulaste a la hora de describir la posición de Eucken, sobre todo en particular respecto de la idea de tener que proveer una fundamentación moral de la comunidad en el resultado de este ascenso de la razón, me dio la impresión que Eucken pensaba que se podía determinar el contenido, o que no era mera idea la idea de esa fundamentación racional de la comunidad, sino que se podía llegar, o que por lo menos se podía determinar que el ascenso, este ascenso es su contenido. Porque me parece que Husserl es bastante claro que es el contenido, si tú crees que la reforma de la comunidad en el ascenso de la humanidad a ser una humanidad verdadera se puede esclarecer filosóficamente o determinar filosóficamente el contenido de esa reforma, o si más bien siempre está en permanente revisión y por siempre no se puede dar ningún contenido definitivo o ningún contenido como...
Bueno, uno de los textos de Eucken se llama justamente la lucha por un contenido espiritual de la vida. Y el desarrollo de ese contenido espiritual de la vida comprende más o menos 350 páginas.
Si lo tuviéramos acá, podríamos...
Bueno, y ese contenido espiritual gira en torno de lo que yo he dicho, de la necesidad de incorporar, digamos, la multiplicidad a la unidad, ¿no? A la unidad de las diversas formas culturales y, más allá de eso, a la unidad ética de la humanidad, que está muy vinculada a esa profundidad de la vida que se quiere ahondar, ¿no? Y que tiene en Eucken, sobre todo, un sentido fundamentalmente religioso. Porque otra de las obras de Eucken es Problemas fundamentales de la filosofía de la religión en el presente. Así que esa cuestión es central en Eucken. Y todo lo que esa profundidad de la vida en Eucken ha sido explicitada por él, reaparecería en Husserl en la idea de una teleología. Uno podría decir que la teleología asume en Husserl el papel que esa profundidad de la vida tiene en Eucken.
Muchas gracias, profesor. Ya estamos un poco... sí. Ay, perdón, Graciela.
Más fuerte, más fuerte.
Sí, la última respuesta y fundamental que estaba pudiera asimilar estas formas de vida, las formas simbólicas, sobre todo pensado por el lado de la multiplicidad de la unidad, ¿no? Es decir, todas las formas, el arte, la gestión, el historia, el lenguaje, tienden de diferentes maneras, ¿no? Digamos, a este movimiento, ¿no? De lo múltiple de lo uno. Esta parte de así de claro que cambiando, ¿no? Pero ¿hay alguna relación con
Perdón, voy a repetir la pregunta porque no se escucha desde ahí. La pregunta de Graciela es si se puede relacionar el concepto de forma de vida con el concepto de Castiler de forma simbólica. Si entendí bien, existe esta relación de lo múltiple, la transformación de lo múltiple en uno.
Yo no haría la relación porque las formas de vida, ¿no? Las formas simbólicas ocupan el lugar de las categorías kantianas. Y las formas de vida en Eucken son una visión ontológica sobre la realidad. Ahí habría una separación, por más coincidencias que uno pudiera encontrar en la forma de unir lo múltiple. Unir lo múltiple es a través de una forma simbólica, en un caso. Unir lo múltiple, en el caso de Eucken, es la construcción de una unidad que reúna esa multiplicidad. Pero eso es algo que está sucediendo en la realidad misma y que nosotros reinstituimos, ¿no? O reanimamos. En cambio, lo de Cassirer es más kantiano. Lo de Eucken es más tradicional, por así decirlo, ¿no? Por eso se puede hacer la referencia a una construcción de tipo plotiniana.
Porque es un tema que me excede mucho, pero no puedo dejar de verlo como imagen, como una inversión del proceso constitutivo también, como de la fundación estratificada.
Habría algo de constitución en el sentido de que incorporo el mundo a mí, como dice Eucken. Tomo elementos del mundo y sobre esa base constituyo nuevas realidades. Ahí habría un elemento constitutivo. Las escasas referencias de Husserl a Eucken, que son 2 páginas de homenaje, no hacen, digamos, referencia al problema de la constitución. Simplemente dice que lo que Eucken hace de arriba para abajo, según, digamos, la terminología kantiana, Husserl lo hace de abajo para arriba. ¿Cómo?
El doble camino de Plotino.
También.
Bueno.
En realidad Cassirer,
Ahí volvimos a Plotino.
Pero la referencia implícita de Husserl en este caso es acá, la doble vía para la deducción de las categorías.
¿Hay algún comentario? ¿No? Bueno, muchísimas gracias, profesor. Es un honor que haya participado.
No, gracias por la
esto.
presencia.
Y bueno, quería decirles que mañana nos vemos nuevamente. Mañana vamos a tener la primera sesión a las 14:10 de Argentina. Que son las 6 de la tarde en Europa, y la primera sesión va a ser en inglés. So I see you tomorrow. If there is someone there still awake, we will see you tomorrow, and we hope we won't have any technical problems tomorrow. Bye. Y hoy fue un estrés total.